In this 1903 portrait of four siblings, the youngest one isn't looking at the camera. Sarah Reynolds had been working at the Historical Society of Boston for nearly 15 years, but she had never seen a photograph quite like this one. It arrived in a worn leather portfolio, donated by an elderly woman who claimed it had been in her family for generations, but whose connection to the subjects remained unclear. The image showed four children arranged on a Victorian settee, dressed in their finest clothes. Three of them stared directly at the camera, with the solemn expressions typical of early photography. But the youngest child, a girl who appeared to be no more than 5 years old, gazed off to the side with an unsettling stillness. Sarah adjusted her desk lamp, bringing the photograph closer. The detail was remarkable for 1903. She could see the intricate lace on the girls' dresses, the carefully combed hair of the only boy, and the ornate wallpaper behind them. Something about the composition felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. Her colleague, Marcus, stopped by her desk with his usual afternoon coffee. "What have you got there?" "I'm not sure yet," Sarah admitted, sliding the photo toward him. "Look at the youngest one. Does something seem off to you?" Marcus studied it for a long moment, his expression shifting from casual interest to concentration. "The way she's positioned, it's different from the others. And her eyes." "Exactly," Sarah said. "I think this might be a post-mortem photograph." The practice had been common in the 19th and early 20th centuries, particularly for families who had lost children. In an era before casual photography, a death portrait might be the only image a family would ever have of their child. Marcus leaned closer. "If that's true, this is incredibly well done. Usually you can tell immediately. But this, she almost looks alive." Sarah turned the photograph over. On the back, written in faded ink, were four names: Eleanor, Thomas, Catherine, and Little Rose. Spring 1903. Below that, an address in Salem, Massachusetts. "I need to find out who these children were," Sarah said quietly. "And what happened to Rose?" The following morning, Sarah arrived at the Historical Society an hour early. She had barely slept, her mind cycling through the image of those four children and the mystery of Little Rose. She made herself tea and settled at her desk with her laptop and a notepad. Salem, Massachusetts in 1903 would have kept detailed records: birth certificates, death certificates, census data, church registers. If Rose had died, there would be documentation. She started with the 1900 census, searching for families with children matching the approximate ages in the photograph. The process was tedious. Salem had been a thriving city at the turn of the century, home to thousands of families. After 2 hours, she found something promising. A family living on Chestnut Street, Robert and Ann, with children Eleanor, age 12, Thomas, age 9, Catherine, age 7, and Rose, age 4. Sarah's pulse quickened. The ages matched perfectly, but the 1900 census had been taken 3 years before the photograph. She needed to know what happened between 1900 and 1903. She shifted her search to death records. The Salem Vital Records Office maintained digitized archives dating back to the 1850s. She entered Rose's name and the approximate year. The record appeared on her screen, stark and simple. Rose, daughter of Robert and Ann, died April 3, 1903. Age, 6 years. Cause, scarlet fever. Sarah sat back in her chair, a wave of sadness washing over her. Scarlet fever had been devastating in that era, particularly for children. Before antibiotics, it killed thousands every year. She printed the death certificate and compared it with the photograph. April 1903. The inscription on the back read, Spring 1903. The photograph had likely been taken within days of Rose's death, perhaps even on the same day. But something didn't align. In post-mortem photography, families usually tried to make the deceased appear as lifelike as possible, positioning them as if they were merely sleeping or sitting peacefully. Yet Rose wasn't looking at the camera like her siblings. Her gaze was directed elsewhere, almost as if she were looking at someone just outside the frame. Sarah made a note. Why position her differently? What were they trying to capture? Sarah spent the next week diving deeper into the family's history. She discovered that Robert worked as a shipwright in Salem's once thriving maritime industry. while Anne had been a seamstress. They were solidly middle class, neither wealthy nor struggling, the kind of family that would save for months to afford a professional portrait. The Salem Public Library's genealogy section held city directories from the early 1900s. Sarah found the family listed at 47 Chestnut Street from 1899 through 1905. After that, the trail went cold. No further listings appeared. She expanded her search to newspaper archives. The Salem Evening News had been publishing since the 1880s, and most issues had been digitized. She searched for any mention of the family name during 1903. On April 7, 1903, she found a brief obituary. Died. On Friday last, Rose, beloved daughter of Robert and Anne, aged 6 years. The funeral was held Monday from the family residence. The family wishes to express their gratitude to neighbors and friends for their kindness during this difficult time. The obituary was painfully brief, offering no details about Rose herself, no mention of her personality or what she had loved. Sarah had seen hundreds of death notices from this period, and they were almost always formulaic, but something about the sparse entry felt particularly heartbreaking. She continued searching and found another article from May 1903. This one about a memorial service at the First Church of Salem for children who had died during the recent scarlet fever outbreak. 17 children were listed. Rose was among them. 17 children in one small city, all lost to the same disease within weeks of each other. Sarah tried to imagine the grief that must have blanketed Salem that spring, the empty chairs at dinner tables, the toys left untouched. But she still didn't understand the photograph. Why go through the elaborate process of dressing the surviving children, arranging them with their deceased sister, and creating this haunting family portrait? What had the parents been trying to preserve? Sarah examined the photograph again under magnification, looking for any marks or signatures that might identify the photographer. In the bottom right corner, barely visible, she found it. J. Morrison, Salem. She searched historical business directories and found several references to James Morrison, a portrait photographer who had operated a studio on Essex Street in Salem from 1895 to 1907. His advertisements in old newspapers described him as specializing in family portraits and memorial photography of the highest quality. Memorial photography. That confirmed her suspicion. Sarah wondered if any of Morrison's other work had survived. She contacted the Peabody Essex Museum, which maintained extensive collections of Salem's photographic history. The curator, an enthusiastic woman named Linda, responded within hours. "We have about 30 photographs attributed to J. Morrison in our collection. Most are standard family portraits, but we do have 3 confirmed post-mortem images. Would you like to see them?" The next day, Sarah made the 40-minute drive north to Salem. The Peabody Essex Museum sat near the harbor, a beautiful brick building that housed centuries of maritime and local history. Linda met her in the photography archive, a climate-controlled room lined with flat files and storage boxes. She had already pulled Morrison's work. "He was quite skilled," Linda explained, carefully removing photographs from protective sleeves. "His memorial portraits are remarkably sensitive. He seemed to understand what families needed." Sarah examined the 3 post-mortem photographs. Each showed a deceased child positioned with family members, but in each case the deceased child was positioned to appear as if sleeping or resting naturally, eyes closed, peaceful. None of them had the unusual quality of Rose's photograph, that sense of the child looking at something beyond the camera's view. "This is different," Sarah said, showing Linda the photograph she'd brought. "Have you seen anything like this in his work?" Linda studied it carefully, her expression growing thoughtful. "No, and honestly, it's technically more difficult. Positioning a deceased person with open eyes was very rare. It required significant skill and, frankly, could be disturbing if done poorly. But he did it well," Sarah observed. "He did," Linda agreed, "which makes me wonder why." Sarah's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. She had posted a query on a genealogy forum, asking if anyone had information about the family. 2 days later, she received an email from a woman named Patricia living in Portland, Maine. "I believe Rose was my great-great-aunt," Patricia wrote. "My grandmother was Eleanor, the oldest girl in that photograph. She passed away in 1987, but before she died, She left behind some letters and personal papers. I've never gone through them all. Would you be interested? Sarah called Patricia immediately. They spoke for nearly an hour. Patricia explained that Eleanor had married in 1913 and moved to Maine, where she raised 4 children and lived until the age of 99. She had rarely spoken about her childhood or the siblings she'd lost. Siblings, plural? Sarah asked. Yes, Patricia said quietly. Thomas died in World War I. Catherine died in the 1918 flu pandemic. Eleanor was the only one who survived into old age. I think that's why she didn't talk about the past much. Too painful. Patricia agreed to search through Eleanor's papers. A week later, a package arrived at Sarah's office containing photocopies of letters, diary entries, and documents spanning decades. Near the bottom of the stack, Sarah found a letter dated 1969, written by Eleanor at age 81 to a granddaughter who had asked about the old photograph. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she read, "You asked about Rose and why she looks the way she does in that photograph. I was 12 years old when she died, old enough to remember everything clearly. Rose had been sick for 5 days. We all thought she would recover. She was so strong, so full of life. But on the morning of April 3rd, she woke with a terrible fever. By afternoon, she was gone." Mother was devastated. She couldn't bear the thought of never seeing Rose's eyes again. When Father suggested the memorial portrait, Mother insisted that Rose be positioned as if she were still with us, still looking at the world. She asked Mr. Morrison if it would be possible to photograph Rose with her eyes open. I remember Mr. Morrison's kindness. He said yes. Eleanor's letter continued with details that made Sarah's chest tighten. The sitting took place 2 days after Rose died on a Sunday afternoon. Mr. Morrison came to our house with his camera and equipment. I remember watching him set up in our parlor where the light was best. Mother had dressed Rose in her favorite white dress, the one with the blue ribbon. She had brushed her hair until it shone. Thomas, Catherine, and I wore our Sunday clothes. Mother wanted us to look like a family, all together one last time. Mr. Morrison was so patient. He explained everything he was doing, speaking softly as if Rose could still hear him. He positioned us on the settee, with Rose sitting between Catherine and me. Thomas sat on the end. The hardest part was Rose's eyes. Mr. Morrison had to use special techniques. I didn't understand them then, but later I learned he had carefully opened Rose's eyelids and used small props to keep them in position. He worked so gently, as if she were merely sleeping and he didn't want to wake her. But even with her eyes open, something was different. She wasn't looking at the camera like the rest of us. Mother asked Mr. Morrison to adjust her position, but he said, "Her gaze is fixed now. We cannot change where she's looking." Mother asked where Rose was looking, and Mr. Morrison pointed to a corner of the room near the window where Rose used to sit with her dolls. "She's looking at something she loved," he said. "Perhaps that's better than looking at a camera." Mother began to cry then, but she said yes, that was better. That was right. The session took nearly an hour. We had to sit very still while Mr. Morrison prepared the exposure. I remember the weight of Rose beside me, her body cold even through our clothes. I remember wanting to hold her hand but being afraid to move and ruin the photograph. When it was done, Mr. Morrison packed his equipment. He told Mother the photograph would be ready in a week. He refused payment. "Some things," he said, "are not about money. They're about preserving love." Sarah set the letter down, wiping her eyes. The photograph suddenly felt different, imbued with a profound sadness and an equally profound love. Sarah knew she needed to learn more about James Morrison himself. Who was this photographer who understood grief so intimately? She returned to the Peabody Essex Museum and asked Linda if they had any personal papers or records related to Morrison. "Actually, yes," Linda said. "We have one of his journals. It was donated about 10 years ago by a descendant. I'd forgotten about it until you asked." The journal was leather-bound, filled with Morrison's careful handwriting. He had documented many of his commissions, including technical notes about lighting, exposure times, and client requests. Sarah found an entry from April 5, 1903. "Today I photographed the family on Chestnut Street. Their youngest daughter, Rose, died 2 days ago of scarlet fever. She was 6 years old. The mother requested something I have never done before. She wanted the child photographed with open eyes, as if she were still seeing the world. I hesitated at first. It is a delicate thing to manipulate a deceased child's features. One wrong move and the image becomes grotesque rather than comforting. But I understood the mother's need. To see your child's eyes close forever must be unbearable. To never again see them look at you, to never catch their gaze across a room, this is a loss beyond the loss of life itself. I agreed to try. The session was difficult. The other children were remarkably brave, sitting with their sister for nearly an hour. The boy, Thomas, held himself very still, though I could see tears on his cheeks. The middle girl, Catherine, whispered to Rose throughout, telling her stories as if to comfort her. The oldest, Eleanor, kept her hand near Rose's shoulder, protective even in death. When I positioned Rose's eyes, I found that her gaze naturally settled toward the window, toward the corner where her mother said she used to play. I could have adjusted her head, pointed her toward the camera, but something stopped me. Let her look where she wants to look, I thought. Let her gaze rest on something familiar, something loved. This photograph will be one of my finest, I believe, not because of technical excellence, but because it captures something true, a family holding on to love even as it slips away. Sarah's research revealed that the family left Salem in late 1905, about 2 years after Rose's death. City directories showed them disappearing from the records with no forwarding information. She contacted Patricia again, hoping Eleanor's papers might explain the move. I found something about that, Patricia said during their phone call. Eleanor mentioned it in a diary entry from the 1970s. She wrote that her parents couldn't bear to stay in Salem after losing Rose. Every corner of the house reminded them of her. Every street where she'd played felt haunted by her absence. Where did they go? Sarah asked. New Hampshire, a small town called Exeter. Father found work at a textile mill. They lived there until both parents died. Father in 1921, mother in 1929. Did they ever talk about Rose? Patricia was quiet for a moment. Eleanor wrote that her mother kept Rose's photograph on the mantel in every house they lived in for the rest of her life. She would dust the frame every morning, and sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she would speak to it, just quiet words, as if Rose were still there listening. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. What would she say? Eleanor only mentioned it once. She wrote, Mother would tell Rose about her day, about what Thomas and Catherine and I were doing. She would tell her about the weather, about the garden, about the neighbors, as if Rose were still part of our family conversations, still present in our daily life. The photograph wasn't just a memorial, Sarah realized. It was a portal, a way for a grieving mother to maintain connection with a daughter who had been taken too soon. Sarah asked about Thomas and Catherine. Patricia shared what she knew. Thomas had enlisted in 1917 and died at Belleau Wood in France. Catherine had survived the war only to succumb to influenza in 1918, during the global pandemic that killed millions. Eleanor lost everyone, Sarah said softly. Yes, Patricia agreed, but she had that photograph. She told my mother once that whenever she looked at it, she could remember them all as they were, together, whole, still a family. Sarah knew this story needed to be shared. The photograph wasn't just a historical curiosity, it was a testament to love, grief, and the lengths families go to preserve memory. She proposed a small exhibition at the Historical Society, capturing memory, photography, and grief in early 20th century New England. The photograph of the 4 siblings would be the centerpiece, accompanied by Eleanor's letters, Morrison's journal entry, and historical context about post-mortem photography and the scarlet fever epidemic of 1903. The exhibition opened on a rainy evening in October. Sarah had worried that the subject matter might be too somber, but dozens of people came, drawn by the story she'd uncovered. Patricia traveled down from Maine with her daughter and granddaughter, 3 generations connected to Eleanor and, through her, to Rose. They stood together in front of the photograph, quiet and reflective. It's strange, Patricia said to Sarah. I never knew Rose, obviously. She died more than a century ago. But looking at this photograph, knowing the story behind it, I feel connected to her somehow." An elderly man approached them, introducing himself as a descendant of James Morrison. "My great-grandfather rarely spoke about his work," he said, "but my grandmother told me he considered the memorial portraits his most important contribution. He believed he was helping families hold on to love." Throughout the evening, visitors lingered in front of the photograph. Some had their own stories of loss and memorial. A woman in her 70s spoke about losing her brother in childhood and how her parents had kept his photograph displayed for the rest of their lives. A young father talked about the ultrasound images of his daughter who had been stillborn, and how those fragile pictures had become treasured family heirlooms. Sarah realized that Rose's story resonated because it spoke to something universal: the human need to preserve the presence of those we love, to hold on to their image and their memory even after death has taken them from us. As the evening ended and visitors departed, Sarah found herself alone with the photograph once more. She looked at Rose, at her gaze directed toward that unseen corner, and she understood. Rose wasn't looking away from her family. She was looking toward something she loved, something that had brought her joy in life. And in doing so, she reminded everyone who saw her that love doesn't end with death. It continues in memory, in photographs, in the stories families tell. 3 months after the exhibition, Sarah received an email from a professor at Boston University who specialized in the history of photography. He had seen the exhibition and wanted to include the photograph in an academic paper about memorial practices in New England. "This image challenges our assumptions about post-mortem photography," he wrote. "It's not about creating the illusion of life, but about preserving a moment of connection between the living and the dead." Sarah agreed to let him use the photograph, with the condition that Rose's story be told in full. The paper was published the following spring and sparked renewed interest in James Morrison's work. Scholars began studying his techniques, his approach to grief, and his remarkable sensitivity. Patricia donated Eleanor's letters and papers to the Historical Society, where they joined the photograph in the permanent collection. She also shared family photographs from later years: Eleanor as a young bride, Eleanor with her children, Eleanor as an elderly woman surrounded by great-grandchildren. In one photograph from the 1950s, Eleanor stood in her living room in Portland. On the mantel behind her, clearly visible, was the 1903 portrait of the 4 siblings. Even 50 years later, Rose remained present in her sister's life. Sarah often thought about the photograph and the family it depicted. She thought about Anne, the grieving mother who needed to see her daughter's eyes one more time. She thought about Robert, the father who arranged for a photographer to preserve their family intact. She thought about Eleanor, Thomas, and Catherine, 3 children who sat with their deceased sister and showed a courage beyond their years. But mostly, she thought about Rose herself, a 6-year-old girl who loved sitting by the window, who played with dolls, who died on a spring morning in 1903, and yet lived on, in a photograph, in family memories, in her mother's daily conversations, and now in a story that touched people across generations. The photograph remained on display at the Historical Society, a quiet testament to love and loss. Visitors continued to stop before it, drawn by Rose's unusual gaze, staying to read the story behind the image. And in that corner where Rose looked, where sunlight streamed through the gallery windows each afternoon, Sarah sometimes imagined she could almost see what Rose had seen that day in 1903. Something beautiful, something loved, something worth looking at even at the very end. The photograph, Sarah realized, wasn't about death at all. It was about the fierce, tender determination of a family to say, "We loved her, she was here, she mattered, and we will never forget." And they hadn't. More than a century later, Rose was still remembered, still loved, still looking towards something beautiful that only she could see.